welcome back on final part, which is part 4. Anyways, let's continue about Sony. Sony is a Kagoshiki geisha, registered to the Tokyo Stock Exchange in Japan and the New York Stock Exchange for overseas trading.
As of 31 March 2020, the largest shareholders of Sony are as follows.
As of July 2020, Sony, one of the largest Japanese companies, by market capitalization and operating profit, was valued at over $90 billion.
At the same period, it was also recognized as the most cash-rich Japanese company, with its net cash reserves of 1.8 trillion yen.
The company was immensely profitable throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, in part because of the success of its new PlayStation line.
The company encountered financial difficulty in the mid to late 2000s due to a number of factors. The global financial crisis, increased competition for PlayStation, and the devastating Japanese earthquake of 2011.
The company faced 3 consecutive years of losses leading up to 2011.
While noting the negative effects of intervening circumstances such as natural disasters and fluctuating currency exchange rates, the Financial Times criticized the company for its lack of resilience and inability to gauge the economy, voicing skepticism about Sony's revitalization efforts, given a lack of tangible results.
In September 2000, Sony had a market capitalization of $100 billion, but by December 2011 it had plunged to $18 billion, reflecting falling prospects for Sony but also reflecting grossly inflated share prices of the dot-com bubble years.
Net worth, as measured by stockholder equity, has steadily grown from $17.9 billion in March 2002 to $35.6 billion through December 2011.
Earnings yield, inverse of the price-to-earnings ratio, has never been more than 5% and usually much less. Thus Sony has always traded in overpriced ranges, with the exception of the 2009 market bottom. On 9 December 2008, Sony announced that it would be cutting 8,000 jobs, dropping 8,000 contractors and reducing its global manufacturing sites by 10% to save $1.1 billion per year. In April 2012, Sony announced that it would reduce its workforce by 10,000, 6% of its employee base, as part of CEO Kazuhiro's effort to get the company back into the black.
This came after a loss of 520 billion yen, roughly US $6.36 billion, for fiscal 2012. The worst since the company was founded.
Accumulation loss for the past 4 years was 919.32 billion yen.
Sony planned to increase its marketing expenses by 30% in 2012.
1,000 of the jobs cut come from the company's mobile phone unit's workforce.
700 jobs will be cut in the 2012 to 2013 fiscal year and the remaining 300 in the following fiscal year.
Sony had revenues of 6.493 trillion yen in 2012 and maintained large reserves of cash, with 895 billion yen on hand as of 2012.
In May 2012, Sony's market capitalization was valued at about $15 billion.
In January 2013, Sony announced it was selling its U.S. headquarters building for $1.1 billion to a consortium led by real estate developer the Jetrit Group. On 28 January 2014, Moody's Investor Services dropped Sony's credit rating to A1, judged to have speculative elements and a significant credit risk, saying that the company's profitability is likely to remain weak and volatile. On 6 February 2014, Sony announced it would trim as many as 5,000 jobs as it attempts to sell its PC business and focus on mobile and tablets. In 2014, Sony South Africa closed its TV, hi-fi and camera divisions with the purpose of reconsidering its local distribution model, and in 2017, it returned facilitated by premium brand distributors, P. Limited. In November 2018, Sony posted its earnings report for the second quarter, showing it has lost about $480 million in the mobile phone division, prompting another round of downsizing in the unit, including the closure of a manufacturing plant and halving of its workforce. In November 2011, Sony was ranked 9th, jointly with Panasonic, in Greenpeace's Guide to Greener Electronics.
This chart grades major electronics companies on their environmental work.
The company scored 3.6/10, incurring a penalty point for comments it has made in opposition to energy efficiency standards in California.
It also risks a further penalty point in future editions for being a member of trade associations that have commented against energy efficiency standards.
Together with Philips, Sony receives the highest score for energy policy advocacy after calling on the EU to adopt an unconditional 30% reduction target for greenhouse gas emissions by 2020.
Meanwhile, it received full marks for the efficiency of its products.
In June 2007, Sony ranked 14th on the Greenpeace Guide.
Sony fell from its earlier 11th place ranking due to Greenpeace's claims that Sony had double standards in their waste policies.
As of May 2018, Greenpeace's 2017 Guide to Greener Electronics rated Sony approximately in the middle among electronics manufacturers, with a grade of D+. Since 1976, Sony has had an environmental conference.
Sony's policies address their effects on global warming, the environment, and resources.
They are taking steps to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that they put out, as well as regulating the products they get from their suppliers in a process that they call green procurement.
Sony has said that they have signed on to have about 75% of their Sony building running on geothermal power.
The Sony Take Back Recycling program allows consumers to recycle the electronics products that they buy from Sony by taking them to e-cycle recycling drop-off points around the U.S.
The company has also developed a bio-battery that runs on sugars and carbohydrates that works similarly to the way living creatures work.
This is the most powerful small bio-battery to date. In 2000, Sony faced criticism for a document entitled MGO Strategy that was leaked to the press.
The document involved the company's surveillance of environmental activists in an attempt to plan how to counter their movements.
It specifically mentioned environmental groups that were trying to pass laws that held electronics producing companies responsible for the cleanup of the toxic chemicals contained in their merchandise. Here is a for latest breaking news tonight. The 2022 Kazakh Unrest, also known as Bloody January or the January Tragedy, was a series of mass protests that began in Kazakhstan on 2 January 2022 after a sudden sharp increase in liquefied gas prices following the lifting of a government-enforced price cap on 1 January.
The September 11 attacks, commonly known as 9/11, were 4 coordinated suicide terrorist attacks carried out by the militant Islamist extremist network Al-Qaeda against the United States on Tuesday, September 11, 2001, since 2 decades ago.
An ongoing series of protests and civil unrest against the government of Iran began in Tehran on 16 September 2022 as a reaction to the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who had been arrested by the guidance patrol for wearing an improper hijab in violation of Iran's mandatory hijab law while visiting Tehran from Saqqez.
And on the night of 29 October 2022, a crowd crush occurred during Halloween festivities in the Itaewon neighborhood of Seoul, South Korea.
The 2022 Kazakh Unrest, also known as Bloody January or the January Tragedy, was a series of mass protests that began in Kazakhstan on 2 January 2022 after a sudden sharp increase in liquefied gas prices following the lifting of a government-enforced price cap on 1 January.
The protests began peacefully in the oil-producing city of Zanaizan and quickly spread to other cities in the country, especially the nation's largest city, Amini, which saw its demonstrations turn into violent riots, fueled by rising dissatisfaction with the government and widespread poverty.
During the week-long violent unrest and crackdowns, 227 people were killed and over 9,900 were arrested, according to Kazakh officials. Growing discontent with the government and the previous president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who remained the chairman of the Security Council of Kazakhstan, also influenced larger demonstrations.
As there were no popular opposition groups against the Kazakh government, the unrest appeared to be assembled directly by citizens.
In response, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev declared a state of emergency in Mangistau region in Almaty, effective from 5 January 2022.
The man in cabinet resigned the same day, and Nazarbayev himself was also removed from his position of chairman of the Security Council.
The state of emergency was shortly extended to the whole country.
In response to Tokayev's request, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO, a military alliance of Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan, agreed to deploy troops in Kazakhstan.
The aim was declared to be peacekeeping, while others described it as assisting the Kazakh government in quelling the unrest.
Putin described the intervention as a concerted effort to protect regional allies from what he described as color revolutions, instigated by foreign interference in allies' internal affairs.
CSTO troops were initially deployed to government buildings in the capital city, Astana, and then guarded key infrastructure in Almaty. As a concession, Tokayev announced that vehicle gas price caps of 50 cents per liter would be restored for 6 months.
On 7 January, he said in a statement that constitutional order had largely been restored in all regions of the country.
He also announced that he had ordered troops to use lethal force against protesters, authorizing instructions to shoot to kill without warning, calling the protesters bandits and terrorists, and saying that the use of force would continue to destroy the protests. On 10 January, the government declared a day of mourning for those who died during the unrest.
On 11 January, Tokayev said that order had been restored in Kazakhstan in what he described as an attempted coup d'etat.
He also announced that CSTO troops would begin withdrawing from the country on 13 January, and they were fully withdrawn by 20 January.
In an 11 January speech to the parliament, Tokayev promised reform and acknowledged public discontent over income inequality and criticized Nazarbayev and his associates over their wealth.
On 11 January, international flights were resumed to and from the country's capital, Astana.
He also nominated a new prime minister that day, Ilhan Ismailov, and later fired the defense minister Murat Bektanov on 18 January.
On 16 March, Tokayev delivered a State of the Nation address at a joint session of the Houses of Parliament in which he outlined a program of economic and political reforms. The September 11 attacks, commonly known as 9/11, were 4 coordinated suicide terrorist attacks carried out by the militant Islamist extremist network Al-Qaeda against the United States on Tuesday, September 11, 2001.
That morning, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners scheduled to travel from the northeastern United States to California.
The hijackers crashed the first 2 planes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City and the 3rd plane into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States military in Arlington County, Virginia.
The 4th plane was intended to hit a federal government building in Washington, D.C., but crashed in a field following a passenger revolt.
The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and instigated the global war on terror. The first impact was that of American Airlines Flight 11.
It was crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex in Lower Manhattan at 8:46 a.m.
17 minutes later, at 9:03, the World Trade Center's South Tower was hit by United Airlines Flight 175.
Both 110-story skyscrapers collapsed within an hour and 42 minutes, precipitating the collapse of other World Trade Center structures including 7 World Trade Center, and damaging nearby buildings.
A third flight, American Airlines Flight 77, crashed into the west side of the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia at 9:37 a.m., causing a partial collapse.
The 4th and final flight, United Airlines Flight 93, flew in the direction of Washington, D.C.
Alerted of the previous attacks, the plane's passengers fought back in an attempt to gain control of the aircraft, but the hijackers ultimately crashed the plane in a field in Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania, near Shanksville at 10:03 a.m.
Investigators determined that Flight 93 was targeting either the United States Capitol or the White House.
Within hours of the attacks, suspicion quickly fell onto Al-Qaeda.
The United States formally responded by launching the war on terror and invading Afghanistan to depose the Taliban, which had not complied with U.S. demands to expel Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan and extradite its leader, Osama bin Laden.
The USS invocation of Article 5 of NATO, its only usage to date, called upon allies to fight Al-Qaeda.
As U.S. and NATO ground forces swept through Afghanistan, bin Laden fled to the White Mountains, where he narrowly avoided capture by U.S.-led forces.
Although bin Laden initially denied any involvement, in 2004 he formally claimed responsibility for the attacks.
Al-Qaeda's cited motivations included U.S. support of Israel, the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, and sanctions against Iraq.
After evading capture for almost a decade, bin Laden was killed by the U.S. military on May 2, 2011. The attacks resulted in 2,977 non-hijacker fatalities, an indeterminate number of injuries, and substantial long-term health consequences, in addition to at least $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage.
It remains the deadliest terrorist attack in human history and the single deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement officers in U.S. history, with 343 and 72 killed, respectively.
The destruction of the World Trade Center and its environs seriously harmed the New York City economy and induced global market shocks.
Many other countries strengthened anti-terrorism legislation and expanded their powers of law enforcement and intelligence agencies.
Cleanup of the World Trade Center site, colloquially Ground Zero, took 8 months and was completed in May 2002, while the Pentagon was repaired within a year.
After delays in the design of a replacement complex, the One World Trade Center began construction in November 2006 and opened in November 2014.
Memorials to the attacks include the National September 11 Memorial and Museum in New York City, the Pentagon Memorial in Arlington County, Virginia, and the Flight 93 National Memorial at the Pennsylvania crash site. An ongoing series of protests and civil unrest against the government of Iran began in Tehran on 16 September 2022 as a reaction to the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who had been arrested by the Guidance Patrol for wearing an improper hijab in violation of Iran's mandatory hijab law while visiting Tehran from Saqqez.
According to eyewitnesses, Amini had been severely beaten by Guidance Patrol officers, an assertion denied by Iranian authorities.
The protests quickly spread from Amini's hometown of Saqqez to other cities in the province of Kurdistan and to other provinces within Iran.
In response to these demonstrations, beginning on 19 September, the Iranian government implemented regional shutdowns of internet access.
As protests grew, a widespread internet blackout was imposed along with nationwide restrictions on social media.
Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei dismissed the widespread unrest not only as riots, but also as an hybrid war caused by foreign states and dissidents abroad.
Women, including school children, played a key role in the demonstrations.
Whereas earlier major protests, which were violently quelled by the Iranian government, focused on election results or economic woes, the 2022 protests, besides increased rights for women, had one main demand: the overthrow of the Islamic Republic.
The protests were the biggest threat to the government since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, according to The Guardian.
Unlike the 2019 to 2020 protests, the 2022 protests were nationwide, spread across social classes, universities, the streets, and schools.
According to the non-profit organization Iran Human Rights, as of 12 November 2022, at least 326 people, including 43 children, have been killed as a result of the government's intervention in the protests, involving tear gas and gunfire, making the protests the deadliest since the 2019 to 2020 protests that resulted in more than 1,500 fatalities.
This response to the protests was widely condemned.
Since shortly after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, Iranian women have been legally required to completely cover their hair in public with a hijab.
Enforcement of the unpopular law was eased during the 2013 to 2021 tenure of President Rouhani, but was then intensified under Rouhani's successor, the hardline President Ebrahim Raisi.
Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman, was arrested by the Guidance Patrol on 14 September 2022 because of an improper hijab.
The police were accused of beating her and inflicting a fatal head injury. Amini was pronounced dead on 16 September.
And finally, on the night of 29 October 2022, a crowd crush occurred during Halloween festivities in the Itaewon neighborhood of Seoul, South Korea.
At least 158 people were killed and 196 others were injured.
The victims were mostly young adults. The crowd crush is the deadliest disaster in South Korea since the sinking of MV Seoul in 2014 and the largest mass casualty event in Seoul since the Samsung department store collapse in 1995.
It is the deadliest crowd crush in the country, surpassing a 1959 incident at Busan Municipal Stadium, in which 67 people were crushed to death. That's all for this news today. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe this channel and don't forget to turn on post notifications for more videos, and see you in episode 7.